Yes, I am going to talk today about a new entrant project at Glendy Moor. Please note, first up, that there are currently 2 projects listed on Glendy Moor. So site 1 is the main piece of work, if you like. Some of that is quite complex. It is not being listed as a new entrant opportunity, but site 2, the more straightforward piece of work on the eastern side of the main road, is a new entrant opportunity. So if you are looking on Public Contract Scotland, please do note that there are in fact 2 Glendy Moor sites listed. As my slide says there, I'm the Peatland Action Workforce Development Manager. That means I work for Nature Scot, and my job is to help expand the workforce of people with the skills and knowledge to get into peatland restoration. So we're trying to expand the workforce to meet an increasing target set by the Scottish Government of reaching around 30,000 hectares of restoration annually across Scotland between now and 2030. So last year we managed just over 10,000, which is a big increase on the year before. But as you can imagine, if we're going to get to 30,000 in the next year or two, we're going to need an awful lot more skilled people who are capable of doing the work, know what the work entails, and are used to bidding for it. So this is a good opportunity to get into the peatland restoration sector if you haven't done it before, because there'll be mentoring provided on this site for new entrants. This tender is being let on behalf of the landowner. The landowner in this case is Par Forestry 4 Holding Company Limited, and they are the grant applicant. So they have applied to Peatland Action for a grant, and this any contract which comes from there will be with Par Forestry and not with Nature Scot. So in this effect, we are organising the Peatland Action fund that this comes from, and obviously trying to assist people in bidding for it, but we are not the client, and the tender is being let by Scottish Woodlands, who are the agent on behalf of Par Forestry. So I am nothing to do with the assessment process, and I'm nothing to do with this tender hereafter, after I've helped describe it to you. So please do feel free to ask any questions you like. There's no suggestion that any question would be a silly question, and it certainly won't go back to anybody who's assessing the tender, as there's nobody on the call who will have any connection with the so there's nobody here who will be assessing tender subsequently. So it's just myself who has no connection to this tender process whatsoever, other than to be here today to help explain it to you. What has happened this year is that we put a closing date on applications to Peatland Action because we were aware of a significantly larger area of applications coming in, some 17,000 hectares, than the budget would allow, which is going to allow somewhere in the region of 13,000 or 14,000 hectares, which is still a great increase. But in order to make sure that we judged that fairly and it wasn't just first come, first served, we put a closing date on at the end of May. So everything that was received by the end of May has been assessed, and of the 69 projects which came in at the end of May, 48 have been invited to go further and seek costs. So you'll see at the moment there are a lot of peatland work on Public Contract Scotland. These are all the projects which have been invited to go to the next stage, so to come back with final costs, and then they'll all be reassessed again together at the end of July and decisions made in early August. So this is currently a potential opportunity. It's not a guaranteed contract. It may not achieve funding, but it may. It's still in the process. So just to be aware of that, that's made very clear in the statement of requirements. So I hope to be able to answer the questions that you have today, but I'll come back with any answers which will be shared with the whole group if there's anything that I'm not able to answer. So I will check that with the project managers and the agents for the landowners and come back to you with a proper answer, which, as I say, will be shared with all attendees and on PCS. So the outline of this presentation is I'm going to talk through the main points from the statement of requirements. Now, a really important point to note is that a revised statement of requirements, which will make clear how to tender for this work, will make more clear how to tender for this work, will be live by this evening. We've had some feedback from people getting in touch saying it's not entirely clear how we tender for this, and when we looked at it we realised it was on a slightly old template. So if you have already downloaded the statement of requirements or read the statement of requirements, the general information about what the site is still exactly the same, but the template will look different and the way in which you answer that call will be different. So please, if you have already downloaded the statement of requirements, disregard it and go back and download the revised version, which will be live this evening. So that's very important. So what I'm going to present to you today is based on the revised statement of requirements. So it may not, it may not feel entirely familiar with what you have seen in terms of where the answers have to go and so on, but the information about the actual service requirements of the job is exactly the same. So what I won't do is repeat the details of the information which will be available in the statement of requirements, the really detailed stuff about the techniques and the designs and so on, but instead I'll try and draw out the kind of key or the main points. Then in case there's anybody unclear about accessing the information on Public Contracts Scotland, I'll go through that very briefly. But as Fran and her team at Supplier Development Programme will no doubt tell you later, if there's access to Public Contracts Scotland, or where you put what, or how you fill it in, or how you make the process work, is something that you need some help and assistance with, and the Supplier Development Programme are there to provide that for you completely free of charge. So various members, public sector bodies are members of the Supplier Development Programme and pay a fee to help provide that service. So if PCS is causing you to scratch your head a bit, please do speak to the Supplier Development Programme. They'll be able to help. And then I'll talk a little bit in the presentation about how I would approach this tender if I were the one writing the bid, the sort of information that's being looked for, and also look a little bit about what those assessing the bid will be looking for when they're coming to judge between the tenders. We've seen quite a lot of tenders come in recently, which are all of very good quality. So you can imagine if you're looking at a rake of good quality tenders, you've got to find ways to differentiate between them so that you end up with an ultimate winner. So we'll talk through a little bit about how you would work that in such a way that you're putting forward your information really clearly and really well, so that you catch the eye of the people assessing, and they can actually differentiate between one good bid and another really good bid with just somebody that's got that extra bit of something special about it. So that's the outline of the presentation. So the outline of the opportunity. As I said, at the moment, it's just an opportunity. It's not a definite contract until after the decisions are made in late July. The opportunity is on Glendy Moor near Bankery in Aberdeenshire. It is restricted to new entrants to peatland restoration. I'll come on to what the definition of that is later in the discussion, but this one means that existing experienced contractors will not be able to bid. So it's a really good opportunity for people who've not yet won a peatland restoration contract to demonstrate their technical skills, ability, competence, and so on, and get a portfolio of work behind you for bidding for future work. So it will come with training and mentoring, because we appreciate that not all new entrants have done this kind of work before, and will need some assistance in getting started. It is listed on Public Contracts Scotland. There's the reference there, 507462. As I said, please note that there are two Glendy pieces of work listed, and this is the one with new entrant in the title. They have different numbers, as it turns out, but anyway, this is just to be clear, you need to be looking for the new entrant one, which is 462. The tender must be submitted electronically on PCS. If you have an earlier version of the statement of requirements, please disregard that entirely. There was a mistake in there which suggested that responses could be sent by email. That is not correct. This is a tender making full use of the functionality of Public Contracts Scotland, and it must be submitted electronically only. The outline of the site, it's to the eastern side of the Cairnmount Bankery Road. The main site one, if you like, is on the western side of that road. It's 102 hectares restoration area. It's actively eroding and drained blanket bog. You can see a wee picture there of some of the kind of terrain that we're looking at. We have quite big gullies with bare peat exposed. It's an elevation of 350 metres to 510 metres, so it is pretty high. Which is why the ideal work period suggested here is September to December. Ideally, there's some flexibility in this, but ideally this work will be done September, November, September, October, November, December, to avoid any disruption due to winter weather, particularly snow. As you may be aware, that road often closes in the winter, and it can be quite difficult to access the road, never mind out onto the hill where there could be deep snow lying. So while there is some flexibility about the dates, within the fact that it has to be completed by the end of the financial year at the end of March, there's a strong preference for getting this work done in the earlier part of this summer and autumn, to make sure that it's finished and out of the way and isn't disrupted by snow days. To note also is that this is a drinking water protected area, and also it's part of the catchment of the River Dee Special Area of Conservation. So water quality and the protection of the water environment is particularly important on this site. It's important on all peatland restoration sites, but this one will be looking for particular reassurance that you are safe and competent in the way that you approach the wetland environment. The closing date, 1200 hours on Friday, the 12th of July. There is no flexibility in that whatsoever. That is the final closing date. Late tenders will not be accepted. And please note that is, of course, the full use of PCS. So it's via the PCS postbox, which I will talk about. There was a site visit yesterday on the 3rd of July. Initially, this had been listed as mandatory, but again, that was copying over from a slightly older template. And while it was advisable, it will not rule out anybody that has not been there. So the new version of the Statement of Requirements, which goes up today, will not mention a mandatory site visit. But for future, it is always a good idea to go on the site visit when they are advertised, if you possibly can. It just gives you an idea for the kind of landscape and terrain that you're looking at, for the kind of constraints that you might be dealing with, and any other issues that you might want to get a better feel for. Speaking to existing experienced contractors, they will often tell you that before they go on a site visit, they'll get up the Google Earth of that particular site. They'll have a good look at it. They'll work out any areas which they think are looking tricky or complex, and they'll make sure when on the site visit to either take themselves off a walk when to check out kind of more complex areas or potentially more complex areas, or even perhaps get permission to put a drone up and check it out that way. So always worth a wee look at the site visit, just but clarifying in your head what the kind of issues are that you might want to be looking at before you go, so that you can make the most of your time. Okay, so eligibility. It says, as I say, restricted to new entrants. So although this is a mix of drain blocking and erosion work, so largely dealing with reprofiling and revegetating hags and gullies, for the purposes of eligibility, it's considered primarily as a drain blocking project. So therefore, everybody is eligible to apply for this job unless your company has already delivered 2 or more drain blocking projects in peatland restoration, or your company has 2 or more operators with experience in delivering drain blocking projects. However, even if you have been involved in peatland restoration for 2 years, but not in drain blocking, you will still be eligible to apply for this job. So basically, it's looking for your experience of drain blocking, and is not looking for people who've done extensive amounts of drain blocking before. So basically, everybody's eligible other than those who've already done 2 projects with drain blocking in, or people whose operators have experience of drain blocking projects. Oops, sorry, I'm trying to get this button to click. There we go. Machinery requirements. Low ground pressure excavators. So low ground pressure is particularly important to avoid damage to the site. The client is looking for ideally a minimum of 3 machines. If, for example, you have 2, don't let that rule you out. This has not been made a hard and fast condition. Obviously, 1 for safety reasons is not going to be accepted, but if you have 2 available, please do consider applying. They're ideally looking for 3. If that's a possibility for you, you can hire, subcontract, whatever. Do think about that and consider it, but having 2 would not rule you out. Ideally, they're looking for a combination of around about the 14-ton machine and a smaller machine to get into the trickier areas. If you have 3 or more machines, then it's a combination within that, where you may have 2 of one and 1 of the other, or whatever. Minimum track width is 900 millimeters. And if you are proposing any other off-road low ground pressure vehicles, please set out clearly what they are. Machine should have rotating or swivel heads so that you can get to and from the various bits of hag and so on that you're trying to get to without having to make unnecessary machine movements. They're looking for deep buckets with teeth so you can stretch the turf better. And be aware that portable bog mats may be required in some of the deeper, wetter areas. Machinery that you're going to use should be detailed in section 8. So when the new SOR is up, you'll see that there are tables to complete and fill in. And section 8 is where it's asking you about the machinery that is available. Okay, an overview of the work that's specified. As I said, it's primarily drain blocking. There are 6,201 metres approximately, I'm not sure exactly where the one came into the approximate, of drain blocking and reprofiling to do. So this is using wave damming on the smaller drains or wave damming and zippering on the larger drains. Just to be aware for people who haven't ever tendered for peatland restoration work before, that 300 or so metres a day, somewhere between 300 and 400 metres a day of drain per machine might be what you'd expect to see once operators have got comfortable with the technique. So you won't be probably delivering that kind of length of drain repair within the first few days perhaps, but by the time that operators are comfortable, you should be looking around the 300 or a little bit over kind of metre per day. So just when you're thinking about costings here. Hag and gully reprofiling, single side, so 2,800 metres of hag and gully reprofiling to do. And on double-sided gullies, where they're looking for both a block to the gully and reprofiling, there's 2,287 metres to reprofile. There's also some small areas of erosion control work, so 0.3 of a hectare where there's micro-erosion treatment. 0.09 hectares of cell bunding and a very small area there of trench bunding. So that's just to deal with some areas of bare peat. That's largely kind of confined to, well, it's mapped out quite clearly in the map, but not a huge area. So primarily this is about 6,200 metres of drain blocking and the gully and hag reprofiling. All of this will be set out in section 3, which is the service requirements section in the statement of requirements. So training and mentoring, because this is a new entrant project, training will be provided at the start of the project, which will include restoration techniques. It will include the role of your site supervisor, the requirements for progress reporting, and how they're going to be looking for the provision of spatial data. There'll be a mentor there to supervise and set out an initial day of work, and they'll come back as they're required to. So ideally, everybody will have a shot on the first day of looking at the technique, discussing the technique, talking about the principles that you're trying to achieve. Everybody will have a shot at it, and then review everybody's actions as you go along. So that would be your kind of initial first day, so that people can get a feel for what they're trying to achieve, and the mentor can talk you through the success of that approach, and then come back as required to see how you're doing. So it's not like a one-day piece of mentoring or anything like that, but there'll be a really intense one day, and then depending on how everybody is, they'll come back perhaps for the first 3 weeks or less, if required, for less time. So you're not on your own. Whoops, I'm sorry, I got a bit carried away there. Okay. So I'll just have a quick look at Public Contracts Scotland if you are not familiar with using the site. If you register a supplier, it's free, so please feel free to do so. And then you go to search notices, and if you use the keyword peatland, you can see all of the current opportunities which are listed at the moment. If you do go into this, you'll note that almost all of these close on the 12th of July. Very occasional ones close on the 15th of July. There's a pretty short window of opportunity for tendering for peatland work this year, as there is a review process, as I mentioned earlier, at the end of July. So everybody's got to get their completed costs back into the process and back to the Nature Scot funding team by the 19th of July, hence why they all close in one big block. So if you're interested in tendering for more than one, please do consider your time and availability, because they're all very close together. So I appreciate that some people probably use PCS all the time, so I will, but for those who don't, and I don't want to confuse anybody, I will just whiz through this very quickly. So this will use the full functionality of Public Contracts Scotland, as I said, which means that bids are only sent to the client to the landowner in this case, once the deadline, 12th of July at noon, has passed. So uploading documents could take some time. So please do consider putting your bid in as soon as you're happy that it's ready, rather than waiting for 30 minutes before the deadline. There's no advantage to doing that. Nobody will have access to them. They're in a secure mailbox on PCS. So if you are ready on Thursday night, please spend Thursday evening uploading the documents. It can be quite a slow process and you don't want it to time out before 12 o'clock when you're not finished. So please do start putting all that together and putting it up when you're ready. So if you register your interest, see that button there that's coloured in blue, record your interest now, that takes you through to the listing of people who are registered as being interested in this piece of work. It gives you access to the documents, and importantly, and particularly in this case where there's going to be a slight change to the statement of requirements, it notifies everybody that there has been a new document uploaded. So in this case, a new document will replace the old statement of requirements today, and everybody who's registered an interest will be notified of that. So make sure that if you're interested in this piece of work, you record your interest. Then you'll get access to the documents. And you can see here, this is the list of current documents. The one down at the bottom there, statement of requirements, that's the one to watch, as it will change. That will be the one which will be replaced later on. There's also photos and maps which set out access, and the map of the site is all there as well. So please do make sure that you have thoroughly opened, looked at, read and understood all of these maps and information. They're key documents. But as I say, do please note that an updated statement of requirements will be uploaded. So I will have a look at how I would respond to this tender. So first of all, I would, if it were me, I would set about thinking, was I clear on what was being asked here? Is there anything that you are not clear about? So what I'm not going to do as I talk through this is I'm not going to tell you what to write. It's not appropriate for me to do that, and also I don't know what your business is, what your skills are. So I'm only going to talk about how I would approach it if I were the bidder. And I also can't tell you how to cost anything. Again, we're not allowed to do that, and that's again very much a business decision based on your costs and your overheads. So I'm just going to talk you through my way of thinking, and other people might approach this in a slightly different way. So I'm just effectively kind of helping you think through the process and what to put where. And as I said at the beginning, I'm not connected to this tender process in any way, so I'm not giving you any answers or anything like that. I'm just helping you to develop ideas about what you might want to be thinking around. So make sure that you are clear of the ask. So for example, when I looked at the statement of requirements for this piece of work in order to prepare this presentation, there was one thing I wasn't entirely clear on, and that was to do with the gullies and the single-sided gullies. And was that meterage single-sided or was that double-sided? Please make use of the question and answer function on PCS to clarify anything that you are not clear of. The answer will be seen by everybody, so it's helpful for everybody. If there's something that's written in a slightly confusing way, say, excuse me, please, what do you mean by that? What is the area that you're talking about, whatever, and that answer will go around everybody else. Can you meet the basic requirements? Have you got machinery, or do you have access to appropriate low ground pressure machinery? Do you have it available within the time frame that we're looking at? And do you have capacity within your own team to deliver the work in the specified season? Now, as I said, this is open to be delivered until the end of March, but given the expected constraints around wintry weather, there's obviously a preference for people who can deliver this September to December. Do you have the capacity to deliver that work in that time? And can you work within the site constraints as detailed? So for example, in this case, some of the site constraints are particularly strong around the environmental considerations and the water environment. Are you happy and confident with your ability to protect the water environment, for example? And then I would identify where and how you should provide the information required. Now, I have to stress that it's not currently the case in the statement of requirements as uploaded, but it will be in the statement of requirements uploaded tonight. This list of information and the sections in which you will find this information will be there. So what you should be looking at is the detailed service requirements in section 3, obviously, which is where the work is set out. But then when you come to filling in information, you need to be completing the schedule of works price schedule, which you'll find in section 7, which sets out each of the things that which are being requested, asks for a unit price and an overall cost. A completed resourcing offer, which is section 8, that is your availability of operators, machines, when they're available from. So say, for example, you were able to provide 2 machines on site for the first 3 weeks, but then had access to a third machine to join you in week 3 or whatever. Please make sure and set that out. So, you know, your availability per week is such and such. So it's really clear when you'll have the capacity on site to do the delivery, who'll be there. You know, will somebody need to leave the site at week 6 and go away to another job for 2 weeks and come back? Please make all of that entirely clear. And then a tenderer response table, which is based around the quality criteria in section 9. This is where you basically tell your story. It's the opportunity for you to set out why the tender should go to you. So we'll look for all sorts of the information that you'd like to give about your knowledge and understanding of the tender, the competence of your team, and so on. And then there's a section 10, which lists mandatory criteria, so things which you must provide. So we'll go through those in a bit more detail later on, but make sure that you have filled in the tick box and provided the reference for section 10, the mandatory criteria. And then section 11 is a signed tenderer declaration form. Basically, I guarantee that I'm bidding in a bona fide tender, etc., etc. So the kind of written bit, if you like. So schedule of works quote in section 7, all of the work which is required in this project is listed here. So you can see, for example, there, gully reprofiling and hag reprofiling, when they come together, that's the 2,815 metres of single-sided reprofiling. How much is that per metre? What's the cost? So you should work out the delivery of the cost for delivery of each of the techniques, providing a unit cost as well as the total. And further down this table, there will also be details for mobilisation costs, travel and subsistence, welfare provision, fuel, reporting costs, and so on. So by the time you've filled in on the bottom of that table, you should have all of the costs that you will require to cover, including your profit, for the delivery of this piece of work. So please do think carefully about how you will price each of these unit of measurement, if you like. Given that this is a new entrant tender, you might be able to get some assistance from this from other more experienced contractors in peatland restoration who are not able to tender for this piece of work, who might be willing to share with you some information on how they price things. You might want to take information from a number of different sources, just to get a kind of comparison and see if you can understand where and how people normally tender for this. As I say, you know, the more experienced guys are not eligible for this piece of work, so they might be willing to share a little bit of that information with you. The evaluation criteria, which will be in section 6, will set out that 50% of the evaluation of this piece of work is done on price. So it's a 50-50, 50% price, 50% quality. So obviously looking for projects which demonstrate value for money. The resourcing offer in section 8, how are you setting out to deliver this work? So you need to indicate the timetable that you're available. When can you start and finish? As I said before, there's a little bit of flexibility around this. But also they will be looking for people who are more likely to complete it within the better weather window than right into the heart of winter. Although I have to tell you, in Sutherland at the moment, it feels a bit like the heart of winter. But ideally this will be, you know, your start and finish dates and when you can deliver the work with how many machines, how many operators, when will they be assigned to the project in each week. If this is going to be consistent throughout the project, then please say so. You know, if you have 4 people to assign to this project and they'll be there all the time, then please make that clear that the same 4 people will be on site all the time. If that's not the case, please describe how many operators will be assigned during certain periods of time, and all those kind of things. So please also reflect realistically any staff leave that's expected, and allow a little bit of time in your calculations there for downtime, servicing machinery, breakdowns, and so on. So, you know, if you think that you can do this piece of work in X amount of weeks, do consider, does that allow you any leeway for, you know, breakdowns or or a bogging incident or something like that, and make sure that you've built in that kind of realism into the whole picture. And then obviously provide details of each machine that you're proposing to take on the site. Quality criteria in section 9. Well, this says 60%. Sorry, that's a mistake. It is 50% of the scoring of this is on the quality criteria. There are only 4 questions here. So if you see from my example, there is the question is in the bold, and then in A1 it sets out what they expect to see in these answers, so the sorts of things that they're looking for here. And then in the tenderer response at the bottom of that box, you can either type in your response in text, or you can provide references or links to information that you are providing. So if, for example, you are proposing to not write in this box, but to say, I'm submitting a separate document, please make very, very clear what that document is called, or if it's part of a larger document, on which page this information will be found. Bear in mind, there could be a good number of tenders submitted, and the people assessing them want to be able to go through and find the information that they're needing to make a fair assessment. And if your information is hidden, or they can't find it, and they are not aware that you have actually, for example, talked about how you can demonstrate that you will work practically and sensitively because it's hidden on page 27 of an attached document, they'll be unlikely to score you as highly as somebody who's made that really clear. So you can either write your response in that box, which can be expanded as far as you like, or you can provide the information and give the location of that information in the box. But please, like I say, do make very clear where that is. So there are only 4 questions in which you can provide information on the quality of your bid. So please do think, like if you were approaching a CV or an application for a job, for example, the people assessing the bid can only score on what's written in front of them. The fact that you feel they should know from the experience that you've discussed that you have these relevant skills is not something that you can assume. So you have to, if you're wanting to try and make everything clear, please do consider saying, as you will see from my attached document, that I have this because I have worked in successfully blah 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 using such and such a method and so on. So make sure that you make as much of your skills and competence and experience in these 4 questions as you possibly can. This is the opportunity where you write all this information in. And whether that is directly into the box or whether that's in linked documents is entirely up to you. But like I say, the assessors can only score on what is in front of them to be entirely fair and consistent. So you will need to get across, in answer to these questions, your understanding of the work and the detail of the techniques set out in the Statement of Requirements. There's quite a lot of detailed information set out in this SOR, which is carried over into the new Statement of Requirements, which will appear later. The detail is all exactly the same. It is worth describing your understanding of the work. It's worth almost repeating back. We'll do such and such and such and such a way. Read the Peatland Action Technical Compendium for any kind of guidance if you need some, or watch the training videos, which are also listed, just to make sure that you understand in your head what that looks like, and then describe it back. So make sure that it's clear to the person assessing that you understand the work they're specifying, and that you have understood all the requirements around species protection, around looking after the water environment, around site constraints, and so on. You also want to make sure that you are selling your team, that you have a competent team of operators with the skills and the knowledge to deliver the work. If your knowledge and experience is all in a different sector, which is directly applicable, then talk about that and describe that. If you have a team of people or who are very experienced in working in soft, wet ground, and sensitive environments, for example, doing forestry work, and sensitive. Obviously, safety is highly important, massively important, and we'll be looking for people who talk around, or well, we, the assessors, will be looking for people who talk around how the work is done safely, how the work is done sensibly and practically, and how, importantly, the environment is protected and any negative impacts are minimised. Now, clearly taking a bunch of big machines onto a hill will not have no impact, but obviously it's about the ways in which you will try and minimise that through tracking appropriately, through planning your work in such a way that you don't have to go backwards and forwards over sites, and so on, and the ways in which you'll protect the water environment. The assessors will also be looking to the answers to these 4 questions to understand how you'll manage the project on site, with a high focus on safety, but also in terms of the project management of the project delivery, that there will be regular liaison with the project agent, in this case Scottish Woodlands, that there will be a system set up for discussion and reporting, that you have the skills to record the work that you are doing. So spatial data capture is quite an important part of peatland restoration work. If, for example, you are not massively experienced in that at the moment, that is not going to rule you out, but you obviously have to talk about how you will propose to acquire those skills and hope to be mentored in reaching the finer points of kind of spatial data capture on peatland action spatial data templates. So please do bear in mind that there will be a sort of spatial data element to this, and describe in your project management how you will manage that, particularly if you're going to need some sort of support and mentoring to bring that right up to scratch. Then it's perfectly legitimate to say that you have people who are capable of using this information but haven't regularly recorded it in such a way, and blah blah blah, and how you'll manage all these things. So please do consider using these 4 questions to sell everything that you want to sell about your bid and your business. The assessors will also look to find information in there about your ability to meet the timescale. So if, for example, you don't provide them any information on what you would do in the event of snow coming massively early in November and sitting around for 6 weeks, and how you will catch up that project, for example, or if you haven't provided any information on what you would do if a key member of your team was off sick for a month, they're going to have slightly more nerves about your ability to deliver the project on time. So please do make sure that you've addressed the project management issues around your timescale that you've suggested, and how you'll manage any risk to that timescale. So they're looking for sort of information on your project management, if you like. And then the mandatory criteria in section 10. This is all about ensuring that the appropriate procedures are in place, the health and safety is covered well, that you've got appropriate policies and insurances in place. So I would think through these sort of first off, really, can you meet these mandatory criteria? Do you meet them at the moment? If you don't, what is needed to get the documentation together? Can you do that within the timescale? And also important to note that you should give all your documents in this regard nice clear names. So, Joe Blogg's company, public liability insurance, rather than just sticking it in with some, fancy bunch of letters attached to it. So when the person who is looking for your mandatory criteria, which are attached to your bid, they know how to find them. You've made it easy for them. So we'll just go through those quickly. When you see the table in section 10, there will be a tick box to say, yes, I've included this, and there'll be a box to the further right saying title of document. So please do make sure you've listed everything clearly so that someone can find it. So M1 and 2, copies of your certificates of insurance. So again, tick the box to confirm and enter the title. If, for example, you don't have employee liability insurance at the moment because you haven't taken on any employees, but you would do if you were the successful bidder for this contract, then a letter from your broker discussing how you will cover your employee liability insurance would be sufficient in this regard, with a note saying, if I am the successful bidder, then here is how I will satisfy this criteria. Have this written down by law anyway. And if you don't currently have yours written, you can find assistance on the HSE website. There's a link there, how to write a policy down. Important to note that this should be a current signed version which is kept up to date. If you did write one in December 2021 and have signed and attached that, that doesn't necessarily provide massive reassurance to the assessors that this is a current unreviewed policy that you are taking account of and keeping up to date. So if you have written down one, please make sure it's current and reviewed if you already have one in existence. 4, statement on managing health and safety on the site and any generic risk assessments. So the key documents that are being sought here are decent risk assessments, so not too big, but sensible and achievable risk assessments. And possibly, if you have one, a method statement for peatland restoration. So it's really a statement about management of health and safety on the site, how you will apply X policies, X risk assessments, cover your activities on this site. RAMs would be appropriate here if you have one. Cost assessments for diesel and oil would be worth putting into this bit too. M5, whoops, sorry, speeding through there. M5, an example of a pollution prevention plan and a relevant upland safety fire plan. These do not need to be current for this site. This is about demonstrating that you have done something in a similar place with a pollution prevention plan. So a relevant setting would be key. If you have one for a warehouse construction, for example, within an urban area, that's not going to be relevant. But if you have a pollution prevention plan for mounting in a forestry block on an upland site or something, that kind of example that shows the assessor what you're looking for there in terms of how you're going to manage the pollution prevention on the site. Particularly important here, given the quality of the water environment and the fact that the River Dee is a special area of conservation. If you haven't got a written prevention plan at the moment, can you adapt one from somewhere else to include the information and procedures you already have in place, or you perhaps know in your head and apply on a day-to-day basis anywhere? Can you find a template for writing that down? Like an upland fire plan, likewise, doesn't have to be detailed. A one page setting out your key actions would be enough. So, for example, making sure you're familiar with the current wildfire risk, no smoking on site, provision of some equipment for immediate response where it's safe to do so if a small fire starts, and so on. If you've done past construction phase plans, that information will be included anyway, and you could reference the construction phase plan that you will be attaching anyway under M10, which we'll come to in a minute. Machine operating certificates and first aid qualifications of your team. So straightforward, just make sure you put the certificates in. Make sure, please, that they are properly named. You know, John Smith, first aid, Jim Bloggs, first aid, so that it's quite clear who these apply to and it's not just a bunch of random certificates. So M7, if you are proposing any subcontracting arrangements, then a statement describing how you appraise the competence of any subcontractor you plan to use. If you do not plan any subcontracting arrangements, feel free to put non-applicable in this section. An indication, not detailed policy, but an indication in M8 that you are able to meet the Fair Work First criteria, they will be given in the template statement, in the statement of requirements that you will see after today. If you are the successful bidder, then more information will be sought subsequent to you being awarded a contract about your management of the Fair Work First criteria. But at this stage, an indication that you would be able to meet them. So worth having a read through the Fair Work First criteria, the link which is in the statement of requirements. M9, biosecurity protocols to be followed. Again, just give us the details of your biosecurity protocols. There will be an annex in the statement of requirements setting out biosecurity protocols that are required. M10, if you have previously worked on any sites which have operated under construction design and maintenance regulations, CDM regs, you will already have prepared a construction phase plan where this bit here is looking for an example. So it's not looking for a CPP for this site. Obviously, that's a piece of work which would be done by the preferred bidder. So an example, if you have previously worked in a CDM environment of that CPP, and if you have not, please put non-applicable. M11, related to that, an agreement that you are content to take on the role of principal contractor under CDM and prepare a construction phase plan if you are the successful bidder. So again, not looking for the construction phase plan, just an agreement, literally a piece of paper with 3 lines on it saying, I understand this piece of work is going to operate under the CDM regulations, and I am content that I would be the principal contractor for that purpose. And more information is provided there on the CDM regulations from the Peatland Action website. As I say, it's not the construction phase plan that you're required to provide, just purely the fact that you understand it's a CDM project. And if you were the successful bidder, you could use the templates listed there at that link on the Nature Scot Peatland Action web pages. Templates for everything you would require. And then tender declaration in section 11, literally just saying I am so-and-so and this is a bona fide tender. Sorry, my mouse is not clicking through. Why is that? Come on. Oh, it's thinking about it. There we go. So thinking about an assessment, from the point of view of the assessors, these are some examples, anonymised examples drawn from people who have assessed tenders in the past and some of the things they've picked up when they've been looking at new entrant tenders. So, for example, when it's been talking about your company experience and competence, this particular bidder has listed good information about the projects they've worked on with lots of relevant examples of upland environments, but perhaps more specific information on what a particular person or subcontractor or whatever did on the projects, or what that bidder did, sorry, to work sensitively would have increased their score. So, talking about relevant examples and also making sure that you've covered the sort of sensitive site requirements and how you would manage that. A method statement was supplied in this case with the accurate description of the works, but it possibly could have been more detailed on the techniques. So make sure that you've read and understood the techniques that are required and discuss those a little bit in your method statement. And machinery listed here, which wasn't quite correct, so that was noted in the statement. So, for example, the machine requirements here are minimum 900mm pad. In this particular one that we're looking at the assessment of here, it was slightly wider. So again, they'll be looking for the kind of this kind of information. And the timetable, the bidder had supplied a Gantt chart and had built in some realistic contingency, but hadn't necessarily dealt with some of that risk management, how they would deal with unforeseen delays, sickness, breakdown, and so on. So make sure that you've got as much listed in there as you make sure you've thought about it and it's clear that you've thought about it. And they've obviously then just looked at this and said mandatory criteria, yes, tick, pass. But note there that some certificates, machine tickets, for example, which had been asked for in this particular case, were not present. So please just do make sure that you provide all the information that has been asked for. In another example, somebody had provided the information and it's relevant but limited, but they have provided good photographic evidence, which is good. So if you are providing photos, please don't provide photos which are not relevant, but if you can provide photos of work in relevant environments, which is helpful to your bid and helps demonstrate what you are discussing in the written piece, please do consider including them, but don't send pictures of lovely shiny looking machines sitting in the courtyard. It's not of any particular relevance to the questions that you're trying to answer and the things you're trying to demonstrate. So CVs are appropriate in this case, so they have given enough information for it to be clear who the personnel are who are working on this site. Somebody who writes operators, John Smith, machine operator, Joe Bloggs, machine operator, is clearly not going to score as highly as somebody who actually provides a brief CV for each of the people on site, which sets out their experience, their qualifications, and any sort of similar relevant work they've done before. So please do think about the CVs of the people involved. In this case, their written submission, they tried to demonstrate that they understood ecology and hydrology of peatlands, but also that they're new to the sector. Now, given that this is a new entrant scheme, it's entirely legitimate to set out that you are new to the sector, but that you understand the requirements of the role. And then in project approach, they've given examples of operators' competence and confidence working on upland sites. They haven't mentioned working on micro-erosion, but if you haven't got experience of working on micro-erosion sites because you haven't done restoration before, that's absolutely fine, as long as you can say that you actually understand what is being sought here and what you are trying to achieve. So yeah, again, they're looking for, do you have appropriate machinery? And do you have a realistic timetable? Do you have people you could call on, for example, if somebody breaks a leg playing football at night and are going to be off for 6 weeks, do you have an alternative there? And how are you going to demonstrate that in your project management bit? So those are the kind of assessments of things which can go for you or against you. If you provide plenty of detail and it's good and it's relevant and it demonstrates your skills, your competence, that you've thought through the project management of the site, that you've understood the techniques, then that's all in your favour. If you put in a couple of lines going, I've got tons of experience of doing this kind of thing, full stop, you're obviously going to score less highly than somebody who explains that in more detail. Bear in mind that the people looking at these to assess the bids are not machine operators, so they can't take it for read that, well, somebody should know that I would have experience of that because I've talked about doing such and such. They don't necessarily know that. So please don't assume knowledge which for you is just, well, that's straightforward, everybody would know that. Perhaps everybody who standardly works with plant might know that, but the people assessing the bid might not. So then in terms of PCS, once you've got all your documents together, go to the postbox. So on that notice details page, you'll find the postbox, the wee arrow is pointing to it there. Create postbox response, giving all the information that is required. And then upload the documents with a description of them. So upload all the various bits of information that you are looking to provide. And dispatch your response with a big dispatch button at the bottom. And as I said, please do bear in mind that uploading documents can take some time, and you do not want to be sitting there at 5 to 11 on Friday the 12th wishing that you'd started a bit earlier. So please do consider putting things up as soon as you're ready. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm very happy to answer any questions, or if you have specific queries around any of the kind of things we've talked about. Obviously, I can't touch on pricing or anything like that, but if there are queries or things you're not certain of that Peatland Action Training could help you with, please do get in touch, peatlandactiontraining@nature.scot. And we're also available, that team that I look after, we're also available to run training events and help with kind of demonstration days and so on. And we do put them on a relatively regular basis. So if you'd like to be added to a training list for that kind of thing, please do drop a line to Peatland Action Training, nature.scot. And that is the end of the presentation. I'll just come out of this.